Hello and welcome. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. There is a dire need for revolutionary changes in India's education system. There is no doubt about that. The cutoffs at some of the top universities is over 99%, if not 100%. Students are pushed to the brink to try and further their educational ambitions. Several aspects need to be addressed if we have to achieve the desired results and head in the right direction. India has one of the youngest populations in the aging world. By 2020, the median age in India will be just 28 compared to 37 in China and the United States, 45 in Western Europe and 49 in Japan. But for us to reap the benefit of this demographic dividend, we need to ensure that we see an overhaul in our education system. The Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, in an exclusive interview to me over the weekend, said that education will be one of the key focus areas if his government comes back to power. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the education agenda for a new and changing India. Joining me on the program today are Professor Saroj Sharma, former member, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Anita Rampal, Professor, Department of Education, Delhi University, and Dr. Manisha Priyam, Senior Academician. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor Rampal, I'd like to begin the show with you. Let's first try and segregate this discussion into three segments. We'll focus on the primary education first, higher education, and then we'll look at tertiary education. So starting off with primary education, what is the state of primary education in this country as it stands today, and what needs to be done, if anything, to change?
Much needs to be done, and I'm glad you're bringing this up before elections, because it's important that political parties do try and understand what the issues are and what really has not happened in the last few years. So even though you said that it's, education will be important, I think we need to understand that what has gone wrong, what was being attempted some years back in terms of the right to education, we have revoked it. I mean, the Parliament has revoked it, unfortunately, without realizing the implications. And now what's more worrying is that education is becoming almost like a ground which is filtering out children. In class 3 in Delhi government is actually sorting out children and saying that these are no good, they are non-readers, and the others are talented, which is against the right of a child. It's against a democratic right that any individual has. So what is the way in which a humanist paradigm, a humanist perspective, which brings people together, instead of this divisive kind of a way in which not just class, gender, caste and religion is impacting society, but even schools are creating hierarchies between skills for some, which are being targeted very early, and knowledge for the others. So how do you break these hierarchies? How does the system become inclusive in the true spirit, and something which gives you empathy, which allows you to understand people from different backgrounds and how you can make a much more inclusive country, and what is your understanding of that country?
Right. So let me go across to Dr. Priyam now. Doctor, as far as education, primary education is concerned, what are the biggest challenges, Dr. Priyam, as you see them as things stand today?
So it's important to first say that this government, Mr. Jaitley said that it will be the priority of his next government, but even this current government was trying to do a few things in the area of school education. One of the most important things it did was to announce, albeit a bit late, its new implementation policy, not the new education policy, but implementation policy with respect to school education. This was the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, where it said that it would merge the entire spectrum of school education into one and bring the issue of schools close to where the schools are. Now, however good these things may have been in intention, I think the implementation scenario was not looked at, although this government is seen as being very focused on looking at deliverables and implementable policies rather than grand statements. What happened was that nobody understood that in the area of school education, you do need to look at the ICDS or the younger children with a slightly different lens of care than those in higher education, where you require greater inputs in terms of the labs that will be there, the sufficient inputs into language learning, mathematics learning. So neither was the care regimen looked at carefully, nor were the subject-oriented intensive quotients looked at carefully. Now these things could have been done. 5 years were a long time to have done any of these things, but these remain the mandate of the future. The other important issue that remains to be looked at seriously is really teacher education. I mean, how will you, India has now achieved great milestones in terms of the numbers of children who are coming to schools. So it's like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, you know, you've drawn and attracted the children to the schools. What do you give to the children in public schools? Now, Indian public schools need to be world leaders in terms of what we are giving to the children in the school. And what is it that a good school gives? A good school gives good textbooks, good libraries, good extracurriculars, good teachings in science, mathematics, and language learning. None of these were, I mean, this is really a momentum of revolution. This government, when it came in, the first year, within 6 months, it put together the National Mission for Teacher Training, the Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission on Teacher Training. Very well-intentioned program, but I think the momentum that was required with respect to teacher training, that is also not been in place. So I think the important momentum, as far as I see, with respect to school education is twofold. A very heavy investment in really what is teaching and learning. It is about knowledge. It is about a regime of care for your own children. It is about focusing on the teacher. Now, no, you know, the army cannot teach in schools. You can't have officers teaching in schools. You have to have teachers teaching in schools.
Right.
So you will have to invest in good teacher training. People will have to write good poetry. Good science will have to be invested in. There's no substitute for having good labs for science. So I think the bridge making with important people who are invested and who have been invested lifelong in areas of teaching, in all these areas, those partnerships need to be made by the government. So politics will have to be put on the slow back burner, and teaching, learning, schools will have to be put priority on. That should really be the priority if schools have to be transformed to deliver what they should have. Even 5 years was a long time. I'm surprised it's not been done with the priority that it should have been done.
Let me bring in the other panelists now. Let me welcome on the program Aditi Tandon, special correspondent of the Tribune. You know, Aditi, the education system as we see it today, has it worked or not for you? Primary education we are talking about now.
Yeah, we're talking of primary education, correct. Frank, I can't answer in a yes or a no. It's a very complex question. It has worked at some levels, it hasn't worked at the others. What should concern me personally, and as somebody who's observed the education sector and written about it, is that the quality of school education. And you know, it's all well to say that you have to put money into teachers' training. But how are you going to encourage people, encourage youngsters to actually take up teaching as a profession of choice? It remains to be seen whether teaching in our country is lucrative enough. Secondly, the issue is about increasing privatization of not just school education, it cuts across education sectors, primary, secondary, as well as higher education. The majority of the colleges in the country and also the schools now are in the private sector. Delhi government has set a very good example by, you know, investing heavily in public education. Government schools are turning around. It has been shown that these models are possible. But what I want to say is, to encourage youngsters, to encourage graduates to come into the teaching profession is the biggest challenge of this government, because till the time you have quality teachers, you will not have quality students. And then across your sectors up to the higher education level, the quality of the graduate, the output of the education system will remain compromised. And secondly,
you know, just related to this, if I may add, because, you know, some of the better schools, if you look at them, you know, when we used to study, we had teachers in their 50s, teachers in their late 40s, you know, who were revered, and, you know, we could get a lot from them and gain a lot of them. But if you look at the teachers today, they are all, you know, just passed out of college, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds, and you don't have the same kind of confidence, and maybe even the students don't have the same kind of confidence in those teachers.
So that's what I'm saying. Are we as a society placing enough premium on the teaching profession? I don't think we are. It is a holistic societal issue. We all have to take responsibility for it. For instance, you look at our own usual, you know, routine middle class homes. Where do parents want to send their children? They are now not sending their children to government schools, even if government schools are good for their children to be trained. But the first priority of every parent is these swanky schools, you know, pathways in Gurgaon, or, you know, some nice Swiss cottage school. These kind of schools are top on the priority of parents. Now, these are working parents. They are looking for schools that are going to take care of their children till maybe 5 p.m. in the evening, kind of boarding schools. And this whole trend is changing. From our generation, Frank, we've gone to, you know, schools that used to send us home at 1:30 p.m. and we had long time, productive quality time with our parents. But let us also consider the changing equations in the society.
Right.
Where are parents giving time to their children? So I don't see the primary education challenge as only a government challenge or as only a principal's or a teacher's or a student's challenge. It is a society's issue.
Right.
Unless and until we all come together and place a collective premium on this whole sector, and mind you, we have to increase investment in public government education.
Sure. Okay, let me take that, take what you're saying to Professor Sharma. Now, you know, Aditi Tandon is talking about changing equations, changing society. So should our schools also change? Some of them have. You know, we've got this whole concept of alternative schooling. Is that the way forward? Is that something that we need to focus on?
Before coming to alternative schooling, I'll just focus on 3 points which you raised initially. That was education, development of education is in all three sectors. First one was in elementary, second was in secondary, and third in tertiary, as you quoted. See, if we see education as a whole, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan caters elementary education, Ramsa Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan is for secondary, and tertiary RUSA, there is a lot buzz about RUSA, Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan. So access, equity and quality, this is one aspect of education, and second is skill development. So I think skill development, access, equity and quality, these two pillars are equally needed in all the three sectors. When you say alternative schooling, as she said that privatization is there, and on the other side Professor Rampal is saying that Delhi government has some kind of domains of students where different kinds of different intelligence level of students are demarked and given education in that way. So we have difference of opinion whether this kind of system is good or bad. But as you are saying that alternative schooling has a different concept. It caters the need of society, students who are differently able or who have different skills. If a student is good in fine arts, if a student is very good in music, then why not that kind of skill should be nurtured. Homeschooling is also one kind of this education. So the concept of alternative schooling is coming up very nicely, and government should take care of this kind of schooling, and by this way we can bridge the gap between private and government schools.
Right, all right. Let's move on to higher education now. Professor Rampal, how would you look at higher education as it stands today? Because I'm very scared. You look at some of the cutoffs in some of these universities, it's 99%, 100% in some universities. I mean, how do students manage to get marks like that? I mean, what goes through their entire education process when they have to study like this?
When you talk of marks, the first crucial thing is we've not had major assessment reforms. That really becomes a crucible in which everything else just melts away, you know. Whatever you do in school, even if you do it in a creative manner, ultimately the boards and the whole sort of rigmarole around these marks dilutes whatever effort a singular teacher may have given. So I'm talking of it in a systemic way. That's why for me it's not important whether 2 schools or 5 schools are doing well. It's a systemic approach, and if a minister or a government talks about it, it's actually how a system, and especially the public system, that's more important. Other things, of course, as has been mentioned, are individual enterprises, and people who can afford it will go in for that. But
right.
any country today, when we look at and say this country actually provides good quality education, it's only when their public system is working well, and the middle class also endorses that, which we are not done. We've abandoned public education. So it always becomes us versus them. We will do our children, as you know, you said, we look for our different kind of parameters, and so that's why it always divides a country also. So it's important that we think of a public system in which everyone actually goes to, and that's why alternative are only experimental, and that's why anyone can call themselves alternative. I mean, if I'm doing something under another garb, which is not really following the constitution, I could also call it alternative. So that's the problem. That's why a system has to really understand. But in higher education, the most crucial factor that I see is teacher education, which we also do, which has been what we have been doing, and that is something which is extremely weak. We have not had meaningful change. We've not had meaningful investments. 90% of teacher education is in the private and very often a substandard quality. So that is something which hasn't been worked on well. Also in higher education, what's happening today is there's so much pressure on, what is called self-financed courses.
Right.
So anything that the university does or is trying to think of in a new way has to be, the university itself is being pushed into, and the government says that we are not going to raise funds, you do it through fee. So is that inclusive? It's not. Many private universities are coming up, the fee of which even middle class cannot afford.
Absolutely.
So I think something which allows for diversity, allows for children coming from different backgrounds, and yet quality, and how do we look at that quality without just focusing on marks or outcomes. The UGC program on outcomes based actually uses Bloom's taxonomy, which are outdated models of looking at education. So I think that's what we are doing. We are grappling with it through more of an economist discourse. I mean, that's how they're looking at education, and that's a problem. If this finance minister says that education is going to be top of the agenda, in these 5 years, they've only been closing down schools. Niti Aayog has been pushing for school merger and school closure. I don't think we can have a good policy for equity in education if this is what we've been doing in the last 5 years.
Right. Yes, Professor Sharma.
There is one reason for closing down these schools. Actually, we don't do homework and we just throw the things. In CCE, what happened? We just threw the concept of CCE without training our teachers, without training their school administrators, and without collective participation or the viewpoint of parents and society members. In every kilometer 5-6 years back, schools were open. And now these schools, quality was not given prime importance on these schools. Before 10 years back, 6 years back, many schools were open without assessing or mapping the student ratio, student-teacher ratio, and quality was not maintained. Now there is no option but to close these schools because enrollment is not there. So in many district level, these schools are being shut down. But I am very optimistic. I'm not very pessimistic approach. Niti Aayog has recently said that investment in education, education as a whole, I'm talking about whole education, the investment should be raised from 26% to 36%, right? Till 2022, it should come up to 36%. So agenda is very much there, whether it is in private schools or PPP model or in government school. Then there are various discussion whether it is good or bad. There are pros and cons of every policy planning, but we should be very optimistic. Some good things have also been done. Autonomy, government has worked the field of autonomy. Good universities have worked in that area, are working in that area. So we should look into these kind of alternative things, these kind of new initiatives. At least we should look into this area. When a university gets autonomy in this area, starts new kind of courses, that is beneficial to the society. And also participation of community participation.
Sure.
And view of all the sector stakeholders of the society, that should be part of education system.
Right. Dr. Priyam, your thoughts on higher education and how do we ensure that higher education in our country goes to the next level?
So I think higher education is extremely critical. Unfortunately, I don't agree with the speaker just before me. I do think that there has been a paucity of both ideas and implementation. The scheme of autonomy that she mentioned is not just for the universities. It's also meant for colleges that were under universities. And the ground level situation tells us that there are problems that needed to be sorted out or need to be sought out if the scheme is to make a headway anywhere. So what are the problems? Some of the problems are that many of the universities are not willing to let go of the control that they had over colleges. There is no clarity with respect to exam and certification procedures. Now, if once upon a time a pass out student had the certificate from a university vis-a-vis now they will have from a college, how does the labor market recognize this or that? So there are problems, many problems. We could discuss this off camera, and the biggest issue is that there is nobody to look at how to do the problem and hand-holding. Many of the colleges that have gained autonomy, for example, rather than have great courses that should have been the hallmark of world-class universities, have gone on to have courses that are clearly substandard. You know, it's literally called mushroom farming within quotes in the language of shadow market higher education. That's what has been happening. So the big things with respect to higher education are, number one, not just the idea, but the implementation details not only need to be worked out, but there needs to be hand-holding arrangement and stakeholder management. No idea is a shiny idea to reform higher education unless we are there in it for the reform and handhold to see the ultimate objectives being achieved. That's number one. Number two, there needs to be far greater and sincere thought about post-school transitions and pathways. Now, we work in urban slum areas in Delhi, for example, and we find that the biggest demand there is really for shorter courses that can take the children to jobs immediately, and therefore shorter courses being run as certificate programs are high in demand. What stops our high-level universities to offer shorter courses? Now, the third thing is that the bigger universities need to look at their distance learning programs very seriously.
Right.
Enough synergies need to be built in about online learning, etc. So having physical assets based higher education increase versus diversification of the model and greater reach with respect to the levels of demands. Now, the community college model, which allows students to transition at a lower pathway if they don't want to go the full way, and the community college pathway being linked to a higher level. If students want to come back and study for higher echelons, let them do that.
Right.
So I think greater diversification within the formal system is also required.
Sure.
I'd conclude by saying that you'll be surprised to hear that while on the one hand we've spoken of autonomy, on the other we've had centrally devised curriculum systems that have to be enforced by autonomous colleges. So we have colleges in Kerala that are looking at syllabi that have been devised in Delhi, and if they deviate, they are fined on that. So on the one hand, we've spoken of autonomy, on the other, we've taken it away. And the government has been preoccupied with creating world class. What it should think about is ordinary, average, but good public universities for the middle and poorer classes of India, which are desirous of higher education in large numbers today.
All right. Dr. Manisha Priyam, thank you for joining us on the program. I know you have to be elsewhere. I'm going to take on the discussion now with the others. So, Aditi Tandon, as far as higher education is concerned, you know, what more needs to be done, do you think, and what are the problem areas really?
I think, Frank, the major problem with the education sector lies with the higher education sector. As we see the higher education structure in the country today, we are producing degree holders after degree holders. There is absolute emphasis on, you know, graduates who have degrees that will not make them employable. Now, the crisis in India is that you are producing a lot of graduates that are then unable or that are not skilled enough to enter the workforce. So, the primary challenge for India's higher education sector is the skilling issue. Now, we've talked of vocational skilling issues which have to actually start at school level, and attempts were made about 4 or 5 years ago. They haven't succeeded much, and these have to go on. The fact of the matter is that by about 2020, when the full skills ministry was set up, you'd remember that this government, the BJP government, set up a full skills ministry. Rajiv Pratap Rudy was made the minister. Now, that was the time, Frank, when the National Skills Development Council actually set up for the first time various sector skill councils. Now, there are 41 sector skill councils in this country. What do these councils do? These are dedicated councils. For instance, there will be one for wellness and beauty, there will be another for automobiles, a third one for media and entertainment. These will offer what exactly Dr. Priyam was trying to say, short-term courses to graduates who are not interested in traditional education. So, increasingly, I see a positive sign which then must go on into the future. A lot of universities in our country, top universities, let me mention two because I recently read about these. The Punjab University in Chandigarh is actually offering a welding course for its physics and chemistry, experimental physics and chemistry students.
Right.
Because you need hands-on training with those hard skills. You know, you never know what welding is unless you actually do it yourself.
Yeah, true.
So PU, which is a very prestigious university located in Chandigarh, is actually offering this kind of a course.
Sure.
This has been made possible through the Skills Ministries initiative. Secondly, the Delhi University, which has about 80 colleges affiliated to it, has now a system wherein they are training 60,000 graduates annually in some or the other skills. Now, what the universities do is they sign memoranda of understanding with the sector skill councils in which they are interested, and short-term courses have been devised. And the best part of this scheme is that the sector skill council is headed by the industry expert.
Right.
For instance, the beauty and wellness center is headed by VLCC's Vandana Luthra.
Sure.
Kamal Hassan heads the entertainment sector. Ajib Gulabchand of the SCC is heading the construction sector. And look at where the jobs lie in the future. The jobs in the future lie in real estate and construction,
Sure.
they lie in wellness, and they lie in retail, banking and finance.
Right.
So you need courses to train your graduates to handle these sectors.
Okay, due to paucity of time, I'm going to ask my panelists to be, brief, quick closing comments from all of you. There lies the problem, doesn't it, Professor Rampal? Because, when you graduate, when you go through these, this formal education, why do you need to take extra short-term courses really to be skilled?
I think that's a problem. We're getting too carried away. We're getting carried away by this understanding of skills. I think the kind of diversity that was mentioned earlier and the community college model that was talked of is a diversity which doesn't say that this is skill in which only the industry is going to tell you how to run the course. It's how do you integrate work and education, which was also what Nai Talim was in schools. Don't separate out. Right now, just a beauty expert is not going to tell you what education is about. So I think this model is flawed. When you look at skills as something which is different, I think what is being said, and I don't know about Punjab University, but if science students are doing science along with working with their hands, that's a different kind of model. Not what we are doing right now. All our skills courses are done only by the industry,
Right.
and there is no foundational, no component of education.
Right. So that having been said, do we need, or are we in agreement at least that we need an overhaul as far as our education system is
Yes.
concerned, Professor Sharma?
Yes, a complete paradigm shift is needed. I do agree, but still, I think that there are very positive signs too. If in school education we talk about PISA, International Standards of Performance of Students, in higher education when UGC asking that give suggestion for, criticizing is very easy. Coming up with the solution, with the society members, with the academia, and there should be bonding between industry and academia,
Right.
which is lacking, and unemployment is not a new thing. It
Sure.
is not a new thing. We have
Okay.
to sit on a forum and find out the solution.
Quick closing comment from you, Aditi Tandon.
Frank, I would still say skilling has to improve across higher education sectors, and I agree with Professor Rampal, it has to be a diverse thing. Punjab University offers welding along with the academic course just to, add on, to give the practical training. Let's not forget, only 5% of Indian workforce is trained in any kinds of skills today, and we are looking at a demographic disaster if we don't know where to, put our money. We have to start skilling people. Of course, education has to diversify, a lot of effort has to be made, but I see a positive future. I think efforts have started, and I'm sure they'll yield fruit.
All right. With that, then I'm going to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. The panelists say that they are optimistic and not pessimistic really as far as the education system in the future is concerned, but they are all in agreement about one thing, that we need a paradigm shift and we need a major overhaul as far as education in our country is concerned. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.